Hello everyone. Let's talk about the famous Elizabethan period writer, Sir Philip Sidney. Sir Philip Sidney, 1554-1586. Sir Philip Sidney was a symbol of Elizabethan ideals, blending literary genius, political insights, and a chivalric valor. His early death at the age of 31 cut short a promising career, but his works laid the foundation for later English poetry and criticism. His influence is still felt in Shakespeare's sonnet, Spenser's poetry, and later literary traditions. Philip Sidney was born in 1554 in Penhurst Place, Kent, England. His father, Sir Henry Sidney, was a high-ranking statesman and a Lord Deputy of Ireland. His mother, Mary Dudley, was a daughter of John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, who played a key role in English politics during Edward VI's reign. His uncle, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, was a favourite of Queen Elizabeth I. Philip Sidney attended Shrewsbury School at the age of 10, where he befriended Fulgeville, his lifelong friend and biographer. Sidney studied at Christ Church, Oxford, from 1568 to 1571, but he left without a degree, a common practice among noblemen. Then he travelled across Europe from 1572 to 75, visiting France, Germany, Italy, and Austria, where he met leading intellectuals and absorbed Renaissance humanist ideas. His political and court life. Sidney was deeply involved in Elizabethan politics, though his career was often hindered by his outspoken nature. Philip Sidney served in diplomatic missions for Queen Elizabeth I, including a trip to Germany in 1577, where he sought to unite Protestant states against the Catholic Spain. Sidney was a vocal opponent of the Queen's proposed marriage to the Duke of Anjou, fearing Catholic influence in England. Despite his political influence, Philip Sidney was never granted high-ranking positions due to his criticism of court policies. Philip Sidney knighted in 1583, becoming Sir Philip Sidney. His famous works include, first one, Astolpho and Stella, 1591, published posthumously. It is the first great sonnet sequence in English literature, consisting of 108 sonnets and 11 songs, written in Petrarchan and English sonnet forms, influencing later poets, including Shakespeare. The sequence tells the story of Astolpho, the star lover, representing Sidney, and Stella, the star, possibly modelled on Lady Penelope D'Averux. The themes include unrequited love. Astolpho longs for Stella, but he cannot have her. Then the theme of courtly love, that follows the traditional Renaissance ideals of a nobleman loving an unattainable woman. Then conflict between passion and virtue, that is, Astolpho's desires clash with Stella's moral virtue. The next work is The Defense of Poesy, also known as An Apology for Poetry, written in 1580, published in 1595. The first major works of literary criticism in English, written as a response to Puritan attacks on poetry, particularly those by Stephen Gosson, who condemned it as immoral. Arguments in favor of poetry, that is, poetry teaches and delights, making it superior to history and philosophy. It elevates the soul and inspires virtue. Even religious texts use poetic language, for example, psalms. The influence of the work include it inspired later English literary criticism, including works of John Dryden, Samuel Johnson, and Percy Bysshe Shelley. The next work is The Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia, 1590, published posthumously, is a romantic prose narrative blending chivalric romance, adventure, and a political allegory. It is dedicated to his sister Mary Sidney Hubbard, Countess of Pembroke. Originally written as Old Arcadia, later revised into New Arcadia, features multiple intertwined love stories, political intrigue, and philosophical themes. Highly influential on Elizabethan and Jacobean prose fiction, inspiring Shakespeare's King Lear and Twelfth Night. Now Philip Sidney's literary style and innovations. Known for his refined use of imagery, eloquence, and rhetorical brilliance, helped introduce the Italian sonnet structure to English poetry, experimented with different poetic forms including terza rima and ottava rima, used the allegory and classical references, reflecting his humanist education. His eloquent melancholy set a precedent for later poets like John Donne and William Shakespeare. The phrase eloquent melancholy was used by Fulk Greville, Sidney's close friend and biographer, to describe Philip Sidney's poetic and personal style. Greville, in his work The Life of the Renowned Sir Philip Sidney, portrayed Sidney as a deeply reflective and a noble figure whose writing combined intellectual depth, emotional intensity, and a sense of tragic beauty. Now let's analyze the main themes expressed in Philip Sidney's writings. Love and desire, virtue and passion, the role of poetry, heroic chivalry, villages and a political commentary. Love and desire, especially in Astrophil and Stella, which explores unfulfilled passion. Virtue versus passion, the conflict between moral ideals and human emotions. The role of poetry defends poetry as essential to society, as is seen in The Defense of Poesy. Heroic chivalry, that is, Arcadia represents idealized heroes and knights. Religious and a political commentary. His works reflect Protestant concerns and fears of Catholic rule. Philip Sidney inspired Shakespeare, who adopted his sonnet style and themes of courtly love. He helped shape English literary criticism through the work The Defense of Poesy. Philip Sidney's sonnet sequences influenced Edmund Spenser, Samuel Daniel, and Michael Drayton. His prose work, titled Arcadia, influenced the later Romantic prose and tragic drama. Military career and heroic death. In 1585, Sidney was appointed governor of Flushing, an English-controlled city in the Netherlands. He joined the Protestant Dutch forces against the Spanish during the Anglo-Spanish War, 1585-1604. The Battle of Zutphen, 1586. While leading a chivalry charge, Sidney was shot in the thigh. Despite his injury, he gave his water to another wounded soldier, saying that, "Thy necessity is yet greater than mine." Philip Sidney died on October 17, 1586 at the age of 31 due to an infected wound. His death was mourned across England, and he was hailed as a Protestant martyr and a chivalric hero. Philip Sidney's works were edited and published by his sister Mary Sidney Hubbard, who was also a great literary patron. Sidney is remembered as the ideal Renaissance gentleman, a poet, courtier, soldier, and a scholar. Philip Sidney is widely celebrated for his chivalry, patriotism, and literary achievements. Modern scholars see him as one of the founding figures of English Renaissance literature. Philip Sidney's The Defense of Poesy was partly inspired by Plato's and Aristotle's debates on poetry. Philip Sidney's sister, Mary Sidney Hubbard, was one of the most influential women in English literature and helped preserve and edit his works. His Astrophel and Stella was the first English sonnet sequence to focus on a deeply personal and a psychological exploration of love. Edmund Spenser in The Faerie Queene paid a tribute to Sidney after his death. Philip Sidney was one of the first English poets to use classical poetic forms with English themes.